Alright, here we go with day number 2 of my over-the-board Chess Master study plan. This is one of the study plans available on the ChessGoals website. So for the first day, I played a rapid game, did a puzzle warm-up, and analyzed the rapid game. This is day number 2, which actually happened a couple days prior to this recording. And I played a 60 plus 30 over-the-board game and analyzed it. So I'm going to show you the game, talk a little through the analysis, some takeaways, and yeah, here we go. So I was playing the white pieces against an 1800 rated opponent, and we played actually in the last over-the-board event I was in with the exact same colors, so I knew a little bit what to expect. So this is a 60-minute game with 30-second increment. I started off with e4, he played e5, knight f3. Now, last game he played knight to c6, and after d4, e takes d, knight takes d4, we got into the new Scotch repertoire that I'm working on. So I have an e4 course coming out for ChessGoals. I'm done with 2 chapters so far out of 10, but we got a Scotch Potter variation, and I'll put a little card to that above if you're interested in that video. Check that out. But in this game, Black wanted to avoid my Scotch, and he played 2d6, the Philidor Defense. I should also mention, in preparation for this game, I did look a little bit at my opponent's openings to see what other things he plays besides the Scotch, and I did see d6 in there. But I think he tended to start with knight c6 still and play d6 on move 3. So I wasn't completely surprised by this move. I continued with d4. The idea here is I just want to get into a similar structure as the Scotch, with the exception that this bishop is trapped on f8 behind the pawn on d6. So I'm hoping to take advantage of this difference and get an even better position than I got out of the Scotch. Here he played e takes d, knight takes d4, knight f6. This is called the Philidor Defense. I played knight to c3, and here my opponent played pretty quickly bishop to g4. And I saw this bishop to g4 move at the board, and I thought, am I falling for some sort of preparation? Like, the fact that he played it so quickly and so confidently, I wasn't really sure if there was something here that I needed to know about. So I did spend a couple minutes making sure that there's no tricks on the board, because my first instinct is to play pawn to f3. But I do see that it opens up this diagonal to the king potentially. So I thought, well, maybe there's a sacrifice or something I'm missing. Because long term, the plan of playing f3, bishop e3, moving the queen and castling kingside was kind of my plan anyways. So if there's no trick behind bishop g4 or some sort of move order nuance that I'm not aware of, I actually feel like bishop g4 is helping my development. So after spending some time here, I didn't really see anything too unique about bishop to g4 or anything that I needed to be afraid of. So I went ahead with f3. And checking later with the engine, it looks like bishop g4 was a mistake, and my opponent should have maybe played like knight to c6, for example, or bishop to e7. So I played f3, and at this point the best move, according to the engine, was bishop back to c8. My opponent here played bishop to h5. Actually, let me check this with the engine. Bishop c8 does seem a little odd to me. Okay, it is one of the top moves. The best moves are bishop back to e6, d7, or c8. That's pretty interesting, because bishop back to c8 is not a move I would ever think to play. But once the bishop is out here on h5, now it's kind of stuck on the king side because I have this nice pawn chain, and later on, if I'm castling queenside and playing g4, that bishop actually becomes an additional target. Like maybe I go h4, h5, or potentially f4, f5, and this light square bishop is kind of stuck out here, getting trapped by my pawns. So already I think Black has to be thinking, where do I put this king? I'm not sure if he should go over to the king side with the pawn storm coming and the extra tempi on the bishop, but I'm also not sure if he should go queen side because maybe white could orchestrate an attack over here with a bishop on e3 pointing this way, f1 bishop pointing this way, and knights are well placed. So I think already Black has some tough decisions to make, and we're only on move 6. So here I played bishop to e3, keeping with the standard plan from the Scotch repertoire. I want queen to d2 and castle queenside, and then at that point I'll pawn storm on the king side. So here my opponent plays knight b to d7. And that's a pretty natural looking move. Knight to c6. It could potentially get pinned with a quick bishop to b5. And I already have my knight on d4 attacking this knight. And if you look at this bishop on h5, it can't get back to d7 to help break the pin. So that was a little uncomfortable for black already, getting this knight developed, and my opponent chose knight to d7. So here I played queen to d2, preparing the queenside castle, and also this pawn storm with g4. And now my opponent played a6. What I was thinking during the game is maybe he would try to get a quick d5 in. I don't know if it worked tactically or not, but it just felt like I had such a nice control of the position that maybe black should go for something a little bit drastic and trying to imbalance the position a bit, make it a bit more unclear. Because to me, a6 just feels a little bit slow. I'm thinking a6 is the plan, b5 and c5. Yeah, maybe, but then I was also thinking, well, queen e7 and queenside castle looks like a plan for black, but those plans don't really go well together. So I definitely felt I had the advantage here, but if you would have asked me what the eval was, I think I would have said like maybe 2 points, maybe 1.5. And looking at it with Stockfish, it was already giving a 4-pawn advantage for white. And no pieces have been traded off, and we're only 8 moves in. But I think it kind of shows the power of this setup. I'm just putting all my pieces on natural squares, and my opponent has made a couple moves that were a little bit less than accurate. So this combination of the bishop spending 2 moves to get out here, the knight on d7, the extra move a6, all of that in combination with playing the Philidor, which is a little bit of a passive opening to begin with, has already given me a 4-pawn advantage. So here I castled queenside, and my opponent played knight to c5. Now at this point, something hit in my mind where I thought, this doesn't feel right. My intuition just said knight to c5, that can't be the right move here. And there must be some way that I could kind of punish this move and prove that this was not an accurate response from my opponent. And after doing quite a bit of calculation, I decided on knight to f5. And what I liked about knight to f5 is I'm pressuring this pawn on g7, so there's not an easy way to develop this bishop, but I also have this immediate threat. Bishop takes c5, pawn takes, and then I'm going to bring my queen out to g5. And my rook will attack the black queen, while I have this pawn double attacked and knight and bishop attacked by my queen. So now my opponent played queen to d7, and I think this was kind of the last mistake, and at this point I was able to just calculate all the lines. I really took my time here, which I think it was good. I played pretty quick early on because my opponent was also playing fast and I felt pretty confident, but now this was definitely a critical moment, and I ran through my lines probably a dozen times or more trying to make sure everything worked. And I decided that this works. Bishop takes c5, pawn takes, and queen g5. Kind of sticking with that original plan. So now here we see rook on d1 hitting the queen. Knight takes g7, check is threatened. And my opponent here played the move that I expected, queen to e6. And what I had planned is pawn to e5, hitting the knight, which guards the bishop. And if the queen takes, this queen and king are both lined up on the e-file, so there's going to be very quick problems, like even bishop to b5 check, followed by rook e1, pins the queen to the king, and that king has nowhere to run, he's just stuck in the center, so this is really a rough shape for black. Here my opponent played h6, and after knight takes g7, he resigned at this point. And I think the reason he resigned is because, let's say bishop takes g7, queen takes, I now have the rook and knight forked. There's nothing black can do. So that was kind of the beauty of e5. If I go for knight takes g7 check right away, bishop takes, queen takes, rook g8, there's no queen takes knight. And I wasn't completely happy with this. This is winning one pawn, but I felt like I had so much pressure on black that I should be able to get more than a pawn out of it. And let's see, if I check the engine here, it's still saying really good for white. So maybe I was being a little overly critical of this line. But when I saw e5, I really liked that move. So let's kind of recap this game, because it was a 14-move game, and I didn't feel like my opponent made any big mistakes on any given move. There wasn't like a huge blunder, but it was just a combination of things throughout the game. So if we go back here, starting with d6, this move is technically an inaccuracy according to the engine. You can play the Philidor, and you can get away with playing the Philidor. You definitely can. But what you want to do is play very precisely. Like you want to play, for example, knight d7, knight f6, bishop e7, and get castled. You don't want to allow your opponent to get such a big attack going. So I think d6, slight inaccuracy, but if you know your Philidor lines well, it's definitely playable. Even grandmasters play it. And then everything was going okay up until this point. So I had about a half a pawn advantage according to Stockfish. But bishop to g4 I think was the next mistake. This just bought me too much time with this f3 setup, and it misplaced the bishop on the very next move. So after f3, I think bishop to h5 is another small mistake. So we see a couple small mistakes in a row with the bishop, and this is already a 3-point advantage for white. Now after bishop e3, knight b to d7, this is possibly a small mistake, but it's still kind of floating around that 3 to 4 point range. And then when we fast forward to this point, knight to c5 I think was the final mistake. At this point, knight to f5 is just a killer blow, and there's really nothing that black can do about it at this point. The computer was saying knight f to d7 and g4. I think this is just complete control for white. It's a really hard position for black to get out of. And if I check the engine, it's saying the eval is 6 points for white after bishop g6, pawn to h4, and yeah, the threats are pawn to h5, even pawn to b4 is a threat here according to the engine, with a 6-point advantage for white. One other line that I looked at during the game, and the computer confirmed my calculation, was bishop to g6 here at the end. This is a double attack on the f5 knight. And what I had calculated during the game was that I could get away with pawn takes knight. And if queen takes, I was thinking I could play bishop to b5 check, pawn takes, rook here check. And the black king is stuck. And if bishop takes, I was looking at some similar ideas. There is also f takes g, which is pretty nice, hitting the bishop and the rook. So it felt like this idea of taking on f6 was good enough. There was no way that black could really win the piece back. So that was my last 60 plus 30 game. I was very happy with the result. I think my opponent had a little bit of an off day. He was trying to avoid the line that we had last time, but I don't think he was prepared for the Philidor. So he hadn't really thought about it in advance and just over the board decided on 2d6, and I think that was the big reason that he got into a position that he was uncomfortable in. And something that we talk about in the ChessGoals Discord quite a bit is if you're in an uncomfortable position, that's when you tend to make mistakes. You really want to try to have structures that you're comfortable in, where you have good intuition, and that can help you avoid the big mistakes. And then one other point I wanted to bring up with my study plan, someone asked in our Discord, it was actually Madluck, who's one of our YouTube fans as well. He said on day one, was that all you did for your master study plan? And I think that's a really good question. I've looked at some data on chess improvement, and the older you are and the higher your rating gets, the harder it is to improve. So my rating is somewhere around 2230 USCF. That's kind of my measuring stick for how well I'm playing. I prefer that over online blitz ratings, for example. And I think if I were to really want to improve my 2230 rating, and let's say get to 2300, I think I would need to be spending much more than 45 minutes to 60 minutes a day on chess. I think I would need to probably average a couple hours a day of like really focused chess study and really hone in on my weaknesses. But that's not the level I'm going for right now. What I'm trying to do is just get back to where I think I was when I first got that master title. I felt very sharp in my openings. I felt sharp in the middle games out of the openings. My time management was good. My confidence was high. That's kind of where I want to get back to. So like pushing back to where I was, but not necessarily trying to reach new levels. Like if I could play just slightly above my rating and slowly increase that rating, at this point I'm happy with that. So that's kind of the current goal. This was day 2, playing this game, prepping for it, analyzing. The total of all of that probably took a little over 2 hours, so spent a little more than on day 1. So I hope you guys are enjoying this study plan recap. And check out the links in the description. We have premium study plans available for sale, and it gets you access to our Discord. I'm in there answering questions. We have a whole community of people that give better advice than me, to be honest. Like, everyone's really helpful. So check those links out in the description. Thank you for watching, and we'll see you in the next video, which will be day number 3.